morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the December 6, 2023 North Carolina State Board of Education meeting. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. Delighted to welcome all board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. And note, you can follow the State Board of Education on its Twitter page at ED_StateBoard_NC. And you can also follow our meeting online and see all materials by going to SBE meetings at www.ncpublicschools.org. As we begin this meeting here in Raleigh, we're just a few miles from a school whose school family is in our prayers. In the wake of that tragedy, as well as multiple similar unfortunate incidents in schools across our state, we're reminded of the vital need to keep our students and their schools safe. While our mission in public education is centered on raising our students' academic achievement, it goes far beyond teaching reading and math, science and social studies. Public schools are a place where every student is welcomed just as they are. Given the diverse needs of our students, public schools must deliver an array of services and supports, and those services certainly center around academic education, but they must also include creating conditions where learning can happen and where our students and educators can feel safe in our buildings. Numerous reports and some of the most recent data confirm that our students and educators' mental health have never been more precarious than they are now. This work is critical and it's urgent. And it's impossible for any one person or body or school to do this work alone. It'll take each and every one of us, state and local leaders, our educators, our school families, parents, and our communities, to come together and work towards safer schools and communities and better health for our students. Today and in the coming months, this board commits itself to go all in this critical work, and will continue to advocate for increased mental health, counseling, and social supports. We'll continue to explore what's working, to advocate for funding, and to scrutinize the public dollars spent on mental health and school safety to ensure that together we make a positive difference in the lives of our students and our educators. I'm also grateful this month, as in every month, to welcome so many local superintendents who are joining us over the next couple days. You stand in your communities as guardians, not just over the academic welfare of your students, but as trusted leaders and custodians of their livelihoods and of our state's future. We stand with you to support you. Over the next couple of days, here's just a few of the superintendents that we're delighted to welcome to be joining us today. If you are here today, if you'd please stand and remain standing when I call you so we can recognize you. Dr. Marvin Connolly, Superintendent of Cumberland County Schools. Dr. Jared Dennis, Superintendent of Stanley County Schools. Dr. Steve Ellis, Superintendent of Nash County Schools. Dr. Charles Faust, Superintendent of New Hanover County Schools. Dr. Crystal Hill, Superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. Dr. Rob Jackson, Superintendent of Buncombe County Schools. Dr. Anthony Jackson, Superintendent of Chatham County Schools. Dr. John Kopicki, Superintendent of Cabarrus County Schools. Dr. Pascal Mubunga, Superintendent of Durham County Schools. Dr. Whitney Oakley, Superintendent of Guilford County Schools. Dr. Keith Parker, Superintendent of Elizabeth City Pasquotank Schools. Dr. Stan Winburn, Superintendent of Granville County Schools. And Dr. Kelly Withers, Superintendent of Rowan Salisbury Schools. Would you please join me in thanking our local superintendents? For our visitors and those listening online, today's agenda involves our board discussions on agenda items, and tomorrow's agenda is our official meeting date when the board will vote on its action items. Board members, you're reminded it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. And if during the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Board members, you've received the agenda last week and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. Hearing none, I request a motion for approval of the December 6th and 7th State Board of Education agenda.
Mr. Chairman, this Treasurer Falwell, I make that motion.
Motion by the treasurer. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Hall. Mr. Fafara, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Dr. Oxendine? Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers? Mr. Blackburn?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. We have an agenda. Thank you, board members. We'll now proceed to our Student Learning and Achievement Committee led by Mrs. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I share the leadership of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. And once again, we are starting our discussion this morning with an item of new business, the standards revision updates. Dr. Day.
Good morning. We're excited to bring updates. As always, we have a reminder of our state board policy, SCOS 012, and our internal procedures manual where you can find more details on this process. We'll start with healthful living. The healthful living standards, the completed actions. The DRC met and completed their report based on the data. The standards writing team met and it worked on draft 2. So draft 2 is very close to being released for feedback. This will be the last survey that goes out with these standards. It's a very general standard survey, 10 to 12 questions for feedback before draft 3 is created. For world languages, the draft 1 survey is closed on October 16th. DRC met and have been working on their report. Our next steps is the writers come together and complete draft 2, and then that draft will be released for feedback via surveys. And then ARCS is in a similar boat. They had their surveys closed on November 5th. The DRC actually met yesterday, and so they are working on their report, and the writers will meet and complete draft 2. And that draft 2 will be released for feedback in the coming months. And that's it.
Any questions for Dr. Day? We're in the groove on these. We know we know how this goes. All right, thank you so much, Dr. Day. We have a second item of new business, which is the 23-24 beginning of the year early grade reading proficiency report from Dr. Ryan. We've all been anxiously awaiting this because this tells us a lot about how our kids are doing and gives teachers a lot of information for better planning for each child's education this year. So, Dr. Ryan.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, members of the board, colleagues, and stakeholders. Thank you for your time today as we present the 23-24 beginning of year amplified Dibbles 8 data per General Statute 115C 83.6. So just a quick update on that next slide. We'll start with just letters update and celebration. Just a reminder, all cohort 1 districts have completed letters, professional development. Feels like we just got started, but they have completed. And then cohort 2 is not far behind. You'll see here 23 districts in cohort 2 have already completed their professional development. 2 more will finish in December, 3 in January, and 1 of our largest districts in April. And then cohort 3, they'll start finishing, they'll cycle through February through June, and they'll finish for our entire state to be complete. So, and that's just the beginning. So what do we do from there? So a reminder, we're going to talk about amplifying what it is. It's a North Carolina statewide formative diagnostic reading screener that's administered to all eligible North Carolina K-3 students. There are subcomponents aligned to the science of reading that are short-timed measures, and it's administered face-to-face, educators to students. There are 3 benchmarks, and the data is used to adjust and differentiate instructional support for all students in a timely manner as educators focus on enhancing learning or supporting gaps. Dibbles 8 is also designed to administer progress monitoring between those benchmarks for instructional planning and supports. Some of the reports we're going to look at in the data you'll see here. One thing you don't see, I just want to point out, our state cohort comparison. And the reason we don't do that between cohort 1, 2, or 3 is because some of our districts in cohort 2, for example, started before the state. So the data would not be valid when you start looking at some of our cohort 3 districts chose to do cohort 3 and start some of their staff prior to the state contract. So they kind of cross over. So we want to be careful not to skew any of that data. So you won't see that in this report. However, what you will see on the next slide is there are 434,000 K-3 students who were assessed by Dibbles 8, which is a 96% completion rate for beginning of year this year. So let's dig into our national North Carolina trend data. Just to look at the key first, if we're going to begin with North Carolina and the national pieces, that light green to dark green represents the national data from 21-22 until this year. It's over time, so you'll see 3 years worth of data for beginning of year there. In the light gray to the dark gray, that's North Carolina. So Amplify actually currently assesses 1.6 million students nationwide, which includes all 50 states. This data, the nation's data, is all 49 other states compared to North Carolina, which is pulled out. So you'll see that's what this graph indicates. As you can see, North Carolina data continues to move in the right direction. However, North Carolina kindergarten students continue to enter below the nation. That gap has closed by about 2%, but one thing we are learning as we're talking to other states, and it could be a factor, is some of the other states are assessing later for kindergarten. We assess when they come in, and there's pros and cons to that because you want to know something as soon as possible about how to support a child. But at the same time, other states sometimes wait. So we're going to continue to monitor that. But it is something to be aware of as we're trying to look at timelines when kindergarten's assessed. Grade 1, one of the things to point out here, there's evidence that North Carolina's investment in our educators is paying off because in 21-22, the data indicates 38% of our North Carolina students were on track as they entered grade 1. That was 7% below the nation. But this last year's data, which is currently our BOI now, we have passed the nation by 2% with our students who are coming in now above the national data. Grade 2, you'll see a very similar story. 21-22 BOY data indicates 43% of North Carolina students were on track as they entered grade 2. This was 5% below the nation, but our BOY data, we've closed that gap, and now we have passed the nation by 2% as well for our students who are entering in second grade. And then grade 3, same thing. The difference is we were at 45%. Our students were on track as they entered grade 3, 7% below the nation. We've closed that gap last year, and then this year 1% above the national data. So we are even moving ahead a little bit, not as much, but a little bit in third grade as well. On the next slide, this is just one way to look at it over time. Same information, but it's just the percents there. If you look at the same data on this chart, it shows that North Carolina students in grade 1 through 3 have more than doubled their gains when it comes to the number of students on track and ready for core instruction at the beginning of the year. So our teachers are doing a great job as they're learning to apply the professional knowledge that they've gained to continue to improve foundational reading skills. So let's look at subgroups. You'll notice we have the same positive patterns we've seen before, and as we celebrate the growth, we also recognize the low percents, and I've continued to say that, but we are continuing to monitor that. Nationally, the white subgroup of students assessed with Dibbles 8 regressed 1%, while North Carolina's white subgroup increased 10% and passed the national performance since our baseline. Nationally, the Asian subgroup made no gains, and they flatlined, while North Carolina's Asian subgroup increased by about 7%, outperforming the national Dibbles 8 users. Nationally, our black subgroup of students increased 8%, while North Carolina's black students have increased 13%, only 1% away from catching up with the national data. Unfortunately, Amplify reported they did not have comparable data based on numbers for the American Indian subgroup for comparison this year. However, our subgroup does continue to improve and has increased 13%, the same as our black subgroup. The one we need to watch closely is that Hispanic subgroup. It's an area of focus. They continue to close the beginning of year gap, but they are 3% behind the nation as they're coming in, looking at their composite. Another graph you've seen before, or chart, when we look at the actual number of students impacted since last year, 17.5 thousand fewer students are below benchmark, with over 19,000 more students who are above or are at benchmark or above. And so what does that look like over the last 2 years? So if we look at the impact since our baseline, 43,000 fewer students are below benchmark, with over 48,000 more at or above benchmark. So we have much to celebrate when you start looking at student numbers. This year we have it broken down by grade level as well, so you can see. As we've shared before, we dig in to the data and go deeper. So when we look at a similar graph by grade level, we can see that kindergarten and grade 1, there is a reduction of students in red in every single grade level, with an increase across the green and blue. And you'll see as that graph, that diagonal there, we're increasing the greens and blues when you're looking at composite scores. Same thing for second and third grade, with the exception of it is happening at a slower rate. So when you're looking at a similar comparison, one thing to think about though is this is to be expected. Cohort 1 has just finished volume 2. Cohorts 2 and 3 are still focused on volume 2. When you get into second and third grade, you're getting into that language side of the rope, the language comp, which is a little more intense. There's a lot more to it than just foundational skills. And so that's where we're headed as far as resources and helping support there. And so to ensure that we're continue to move forward, that's an area of focus that we need to make sure we're paying attention to, or we'll flatline. Another celebration includes the decrease of the number of reading retained students. While the number is still high at 18,000 kiddos we are not happy with, it is decreasing as our students are learning, as our teachers are learning and focused on the skills for our students and supporting them. So here's a new piece of data we haven't really shown at State Board, but I wanted to talk through it a little bit because it focuses on the comparisons to our end of grade. And as we look at that data, that's really important. So one of the subcomponents within DIBELS 8 is the oral reading fluency, referred to as ORF. And it's a predictor, the closest predictor of the EOG outcomes. I think we've shared this before. This slide shows the beginning of your data over the last few years, and you can see by grade level what that's looking like. One thing, we do have 2 data points that's not on this slide with our end of year data. 2 years ago, there's about a 5% difference between our ORF data in third grade and our end of grade third grade data. Last year, which was that different COVID group, they were out of school for a year and a half, it was about an 8% difference. So you're seeing about between 5 and 8% when we look at the comparison. We'll keep watching that. In 23-24, however, if you look at how they came in, third grade is coming in a bit higher when you look at oral reading fluency, which is an indicator of what's happening in K2. So much to celebrate there when it comes to our K2 and how they're feeding into third grade. As I mentioned earlier, though, one thing to keep in mind at each grade level, that assessment measure becomes more complex. The continuum progresses from sounds to sounds with letters or symbols, to words, to meaning. And then the words move from simple CVC words to multisyllabic words like cat to catastrophe. Then we add in morphology, the word meaning, and ultimately a student has to take all those skills, apply them to the standards, include the higher level skills for inferencing, which is what happens when you're looking at that second and third grade assessment. And if we get stuck based on foundational skills, of course, that I've mentioned what would happen there. So those are essential things to remember as we're looking at how to focus on multi-componential lessons rather than just the skills. So on this particular slide, you're going to see this is a little different. All the other data showed you beginning of year. This is end of year to beginning of year. So we've started to watch this data now that we have a couple years behind us. So one thing that we'll continue to monitor closely is what's happening from the end of grade in one year to the beginning of grade in the next year, those composite scores. Remembering, though, that each composite consists of multiple measures, and we have to pay attention to that. Those measures become more complex at each grade level, and then each one adds an assessment that may be more complex, and some of those fall off because they're simple. So you can't necessarily compare the two. So this is one group of students moving from kindergarten, for example, to grade 1. So knowing this, we expect to see some regression across the grade levels. However, one way we can monitor how we're doing is to compare that to the national data, just like we're doing with everything else. So if you look at this chart, for example, if you look at the third row of data where it says 58%, North Carolina, come down to that third row, 58% of grade 2 students were on track at the end of 21-22. However, those same students were 51% on track at the end of at the beginning of grade 3. So it goes from 58 to 51 if you go across the row. Looking at that complex text, that explains some of those pieces. There was a 7% decrease. But when we compare that to the nation on the bottom row, if you look at the national data, they also had a decrease of about 7%. So that seems to be matching the norm. But what we're looking at, though, if you look at the third row again, North Carolina regressed 10%, and that's not far off there, compared to our national data of about 8% when you look at the bottom. But as you look at each grade level, that's not necessarily the case. So let's look at kindergarten for a second. When you look at kindergarten on this particular chart and what's happening, you'll see there was an 18% regression in North Carolina and 13% nationally. So there's a gap there we need to watch, or 23% compared to 16%. So we need to find out what's happening as those students are moving between, and those are some of the things that we're working with too. So how are we doing compared to the nation is another way that we step in there. So what else is happening from here? The final report that we're going to start focusing on, and we've been working on this a little while, are the correlation reports that you see here. We want to make sure that teachers, educators, principals, and districts know they have this at their fingertips. If you look across the top, you're going to see a total of students with a different color image by each number. So 156,000 students there show up in red, if you see the little red icon. 76,000 yellow. The red means well below, yellow means below the benchmark. Green indicates at or above, and blue is above. But under each of those, you'll see a bar graph with the same 4 colors. If you look to the far right, we're going to go backwards. Look over to your right. Almost 80,000 students started the year composite score well above benchmark. Under that number, 92% of those students by the end of the year, so beginning of year last year to end of year, remained above benchmark. 8%, however, moved back. They regressed. So we have, and 0 to at benchmark, and 0% to below or well below. So we have data to look at to see what's happening, not only with potential gaps for kiddos coming in, but for those higher level performers to make sure they're not regressing and they're continuing to be challenged. This is not just about supporting for interventions, but also enhancing learning. And so if you shift your eyes over to the green icon, you can see, while we started, 108,000 started at or above, and then about 45% moved to well above, 47% remained within that, but 7% fell to below benchmark, and 1% even was to well below. So we need to, this is a pretty valuable report, especially when you think about a classroom teacher who can break this down by student to determine if all level of students are being challenged and also being supported based on whether or not how they're moving. And on the next slide, you'll see the same holds true when we think about supporting that language side of the row I talked about earlier. Vocabulary and language comprehension can be more complex. And so if you think about this in terms, you may be familiar with Bloom's taxonomy in the form of a ladder. So basic recall and word recognition are kind of those first basic rungs of that ladder. But to be a proficient reader, you have to move up the ladder. It's the same thing when you're working across the rope. If we don't support our higher level students or higher performers and continue to challenge them, they could flatline or even worse, become underperforming achievers. So we want to make sure we're collaborating with AIG, and we've started some of this, and academic standards to ensure that we have data to provide resources for all students and remind educators this is more than just looking for intervention gaps. We're also developing resources and problems of practices to share with districts locally so that they can identify some of their own experts, and we're going to be doing a video bank so that teachers can see it in action, because sometimes most of us like to see what it looks like when you're talking about what is a multi-componential lesson. What do you mean? What does that look like in kinder versus 4th grade versus 3rd grade? So we're going to work on those things, so be on the lookout for that. But overall, on that final slide, we have much to celebrate. Our investment is paying off, but we also have lots of work to do because we're not there yet. We're just getting started, and we're thankful for the time that we have had so far to get started in North Carolina and already see some early wins. Questions?
Questions for Dr. Ryan? There's a lot in this report. There's a lot of really wonderful movement, and then the things that it also tells us what we need to do better. Dr. Oxenheim.
Yes, it is fascinating data. A couple of questions, if I may. The first one has to do with the, actually, these questions are out of order. But I wonder if this analysis tool that you're using to generate such interesting data, do schools have access to this tool?
Yes, ma'am.
So they can produce these same charts, tables, so on and so forth?
Yes,
And
ma'am.
do they know how?
We have spent time in each regional meeting, Office for Early Learning, to show them these reports, and we've done webinars. They should, but again, that's one person that comes to the table, and then they in turn go back and train. Now, Amplify does offer virtual online free sessions all the time for these reports as well. So most should. I don't want to assume that all do, but most should. They do have access, and we've communicated that.
That is so important that they can keep an eye on these data, just as we see today. I mean, that's where
Yes, ma'am.
improvement will begin. Final question is this. Typically, how does a classroom teacher approach the teaching of the sub-skill of fluency?
So it varies, but depending on what instructional strategies and what access bank they may have and what curriculum they're using. So depending on that particular child, one thing we talk about is fluency or automaticity could, while it's isolated within itself, also am I fluent when it comes to letter ID naming? Am I fluent when it comes to being able to segment phonemes and break those down? So those are embedded within, but also separate. So it depends on the instructional strategy and where the child is and where the gap may be, what that lowest deficit might be, to focus on fluency. But a lot of times I've seen it with being able to decode words and word recognition and increasing the time that they can read those words. But then you think about they might be able to read them and decode them, but do they understand what they mean?
Or
So
reading
there's a
through
shift.
Reading through a paragraph.
Absolutely, and they time the child to see if they get any faster. But again, reading fast doesn't necessarily mean comprehending, so there's got to be those pieces too.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I follow up, please, with
Absolutely.
Dr. Octonine's question? Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Ryan, but doesn't Amplify provide the department with information about who is accessing the PD and the supports that Amplify offers our teachers?
Yes.
So we know
You can watch
what,
it.
yes, that's right.
Good.
Ms. Moore, so a couple of quick things. To extend that thought a little further, for the data in collaboration with Amplify, did they help create these, or you took their data and created these?
We created, well, some of the charts, the initial ones, the nation versus North Carolina, they create because we don't have access to national data. The North Carolina charts, we pull and create based on what's in their system, so the same access they have.
And I think I would just say that when you look at how teachers spend their time, it's incredibly important for them to spend their time reviewing data, but creating data charts is actually an additional burden. So if there's a way to more automatize that and have Amplify just do it as a part of the contract for individual schools, and I may be asking for the moon here, that would be great. Because I think they need to have it. And there's learning that happens in creating it also. I mean, I can see
Right.
both sides of all of this, but I think the more we provide them with what we can, we're respecting their time perhaps a little bit more.
Absolutely.
And then my second question was on the data for the end of year to beginning of year. Transit also had the national data.
Yes.
In that slide, was North Carolina also pulled out of the national data?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Duncan, Vice Chair.
One comment, thank you very much for pulling the ORF data out separately and analyzing it after our report last month. It's helpful to look at that as a separate section of the report, so appreciate you doing that for
Yes,
us.
sir.
The second question is, I appreciate the national data, but in terms of the total national number, we're a little over a quarter of it in North Carolina, and we're a full state user. And for the other 50 states, it's obviously divided up into smaller districts. Are there any other states that are full users like North Carolina is?
I want to say there are one or two, and I can get that information. Not a lot. And honestly, that's one of the, I feel like is a perk for North Carolina when we look at our comprehensive legislation, when we talk to other states, and they have multiple vendors, they're trying to figure out ways to look at that data across vendors who aren't created equal necessarily, and they have it may be a 725 Lexile, but sometimes one vendor assessment may be easier than another, so they pick it on, there's lots of ways around that. I don't want to say that's happening, but it's the reality. But when we've talked to multiple states in our collabs that we have, cross-state collabs, most of them have multiple vendors. And they prefer not to necessarily be that way based on the people we speak to.
Do,
I was gonna ask one quick follow-up, but go ahead.
Well, to your point, having a statewide early screener that is the same for all children has become a best practice for those think tanks that are looking at the literacy and math problem. This is not just literacy. We're going to be asking the legislature for an early math screener because our teachers need the same data for K-5 math that they're getting for literacy.
Vice Chair Duncan, you had another point.
Well, my only other question was if there are any other whole state providers like we are, is there an ability to get a comparison of a whole state data versus our whole state data?
I'm
See if
sure we
there's
can.
anything to be learned from that?
Yes, sir. I'm sure we can. I'll follow up and see what we can get. Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Just
Mr. Hall.
Madam Chair, thank you. Going back to what the superintendent mentioned about the ability to view who is and who is not taking advantage of Amplify's work. Did I hear that correctly?
You did, yes, sir. They have resources for teachers that they can access online.
I'm just thinking, you know, if we have that, do we not notify some folks and say, hey, Dallas saying you are not, and this could be why this is happening with this, you see where I'm coming from?
Mhm.
If we have that, could we not?
So one of the things that we do when we meet with, so we meet with superintendents 4 times a year in person, and then I and senior leadership at DPI in between meet with our RESAs probably anywhere from another 1 to 3 times per year. So we're with our superintendents quite a bit. And rather than, we've always taken the approach, rather than say, hey, X district, you're not taking advantage of this, we take the position of, here are the districts that are doing X, Y, and Z, and look at their data, and so we call out the positives in the hopes that our superintendents will say, oh, I'm going to look and see if we're doing that, and if we're not, we'll fix it.
I understand, insinuating the positive first.
Yeah.
But you know,
Yes.
sometimes you gotta take a 2 by 4. That's where I come from. Okay.
I'm
Thank
with you.
Madam
Thank
Chair.
you. Thank you for the question.
Hearing no more questions, I will just point out, I think one of the important things to remember that we talked about that you talked about at the end is we are not done when the last cohort finishes letter training. We are just beginning on this journey of getting our students' reading proficiency to where it needs to be and where we want them to be. So we are going to be talking about this for a long time as we continue this journey. If I said that properly.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we have one action on first read. SLA 1 is a report to the North Carolina General Assembly on broadening access and increasing success in advanced courses. More good news.
I know. We're so excited today to be here with you. Good morning, Chairman Davis, Chairman Truitt, and everybody else around the table and those listening. You know, I get to come up here, I have the honor to come up here and share lots of different things. Some things that are controversial, some things that have taken a lot of effort. And today will be one of those times where I'm just so pleased that all of the efforts are paying off in ways that are just spectacular. So let's enjoy the ride. We do have to do some more of the business-like stuff at the beginning, but then we do have 2 incredible districts here to share with you, which of course will be the best highlight of all. Today, we're going to kind of look at the report that you have in your e-board that'll go to the General Assembly. We will look at our recovery of access and success after the pandemic, which we have recovered when it comes to AP courses, and surpassing, which is what's super, super exciting. We'll look at the factors for growth and success, because when we were going through this, I said, I know what the board's going to ask. They're going to ask why. And so we're going to give you our best thinking on that, our next steps, and then most importantly, some district sharing from their local efforts. Because as we all know, we're just here sharing the incredible work of students, most importantly, families and teachers, and our other educators around the state. So just as a reminder, especially for some of our new board members, this is grounded in some legislation that's actually the only partnership like it in the country. Beth and I were actually asked to present at a national symposium of states because we're the only one like this, and our outcomes are pretty spectacular. It does cover AP courses through Advanced Placement and College Board, but also International Baccalaureate and Cambridge courses. IB and Cambridge are significantly smaller than AP, our footprint there, but that is included in here. And the goal back in 2014, and we're very grateful for this legislation, is that it really took our vision of here and your vision and put it into black and white and put some teeth in it and some funding, the idea of increasing access to this advanced learning, but also successful participation. And that is a two-step, multi-step process. And so we're here to share that. So some of the goals of the legislation, one was to build capacity for success. Now, at the time, I was the only one in this little office, but I was mighty. But we're still small, but mightier. And we have Beth. But what this legislation did, which is really exciting, is establish the North Carolina AP partnership with College Board. And actually, we have Mr. Bard Keeler here with us from College Board, who is the senior director of this partnership here in North Carolina and leads a team of four staff members who work daily in school districts. So they really just expand the reach that we're able to have in just so many different ways. So we're going to talk about what they do and of course, their great impact. It also, for those of you who don't know, ensures access for funding of all exams. And that is the first lever, right, of ensuring access. So I know when I was going through school, my daddy said we were, got a house in the Myers Park area in Charlotte, but we were we definitely did not have it was because it was one of the better schools. And Daddy was like, you get 2, sweetheart, because the colleges only accept 2 credits. So pick the 2, because we couldn't afford very much more. And what this is allowing is for every student who's enrolled, we take away the test fee option. And that is just spectacular. And we're going to talk about those numbers as well. And it funds AP professional development that Bart and his team do. That is down to the teacher level. So again, just like what Amy shared with, right, it's teacher level. We're working on the systems. They're working on actually what's happening. And it does support our office's mission of equity and excellence, and as well as the state board's resolution for that. What does the AP partnership do, just as a frame of the legislative requirements? They do targeted district support. So they are focusing on low-performing districts. They're giving technical assistance. They're going into schools, doing walks with them. They're doing all sorts of different things and working on vertical planning. They're also doing statewide support. That is something that we've built in specifically through AP mentoring, looking at the top courses, which one needs most support, let us get you support, and regional focus sessions. So they're doing lots of different stuff that is just really, again, arming and giving our teachers what they need to grow their professional learning and do even better in our schools. And then our access, right? So $14 million the state is investing in our students, right? And that is incredible, because what that then it turns into is access for college credit, but also the experience, right? The experience of having a rigorous course and a rigorous course with incredible content, and we're just so pleased with that. Just to let you know, and some of you have seen this, but we wanted to share, we're so pleased that NCVPS, that you heard about last month, does so much with increasing access for AP and other courses, as well as School of Math and Science does quite a bit of offerings as well. We have fantastic flexibility around some of the courses that some other states have done differently, and we really want all of our students to having access to all of these courses. There's a new incredible course for AP Pre-Calculus, which so many of our students took but never had this type of advanced course, and so that in itself is pretty remarkable. And then our state in particular, with Beth's leadership, is working with Trey's team on CTE integration, which is actually mapping with what College Board is also trying to do, and we've integrated courses with the CTE pathways. So it's just really, really exciting time. Now, Beth and I kind of fight it over the next few slides. We fought over who gets to share the great data. So I'm going to do one, and then I am going to lift up the talent on my team and let Beth. But we do have our strategic plan reminders here as well for you. So I'm going to kind of introduce our data for this past year, and then Beth is going to go into deep, some other deep numbers. You have a ton more in your report if you're interested. Happy to chat with any of you on there. So the first big thing is that our AP exam takers increased 11% from 22 to 23. That is incredible. It is more than any year in the past. Now, unless like 40 years ago we took, I don't have that data, but we did not have as many kids in AP courses. So we are just super excited. We now have over 75,000 students, and that is better than the nationwide numbers. Now, which is super exciting. So, we got kids into the classrooms, right? And we have been on this mission for 10 years. Now what is happening is we are also seeing success of students in the classroom. And what this means is that vertically, what's happening is beginning in kindergarten, we are preparing our students for this complex depth and complex thinking. So not only are we opening the doors by mitigating things, we're doing some incredible work. So we have little stars. I give out woohoo stickers on my team. I could have brought woohoo stickers, but we have stars. Our AP exams that earned a score of 3 or better increased to 80,000, which is 59.2% of success rate. Right, Leah?
Really good.
Really good. Increase of I have chills, 15% over the prior year. I'm gonna let that sink in. Like, it is spectacular, and we're so grateful for the incredible team of teachers, of course, our district leaders, our superintendents, but our students, and right? Like, it is moving. It is moving, and it's remarkable. So while you let that sit in, Beth is going to dig into some of our subgroups as well.
Seamless transition. So in advanced learning, as we strive to reach equity and excellence in our advanced programming and the many advanced programming options our students have, it's pretty incredible when you think about it and when you think about your own experience. Students have a lot of options now, but this means opening doors, it means providing support, and it means intentional advising. And so our work in the next couple of slides essentially is to continue to narrow the gaps, both opportunity and achievement gaps for all of our students. And the 2 student groups we've highlighted in our data, the next one is our Black students. We like to highlight the participation, which is our opportunity, that increased by 14.7 over last year, and is also outpacing the growth of the nation. So that's fantastic. And then the number of exams taken, earning a qualifying score of 3, 4, 5, increased 21.8%. So we're not all the way there yet, but we continue to narrow these gaps. We'll do it. And thanks to our teachers and our... The next group that I'd like to highlight is our Hispanic or Latino group, and we saw very similar numbers. The opportunity or access increased by 20.6%. 20.6%. Our nation is also moving in the right direction, but increased 13%. And the number of exams scoring 3, 4, or 5 increased 23.3%, while the nation is at 16. So we really like these numbers. We'd like to continue these numbers, and we think that we will with leveraging the support that we have from our NCAP partnership team and other groups. So I will talk about enrollment as well, because we always give you a preview for next year's report. So those who are currently enrolled in AP courses right now 93,000 students, 93,050 students, which is,
Unique.
which is almost a 16% increase over last year. And over the life of the partnership and the legislation, we're looking at almost a 25% increase in number of students who are accessing this opportunity. More than ever before. More than ever before. All right, so then I'd like to transition, because then we also think about, the other opportunities that we have, like International Baccalaureate and Cambridge. We are seeing a slight decrease, but it's so slight, a number of course enrollment. More test takers over last year than we have had in a while, and more tests taken. We are seeing that the IB pass rate is higher than the national average pass rate, so go North Carolina. We do have 30 North Carolina high schools who have the diploma program or career-related program. And then for Cambridge, we have mostly those schools are in CMS, or Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. There is one charter school, Langtree Charter Academy, that has the Cambridge program. And both IB and Cambridge are K-12 programs, so most of the time you'll see an elementary school or a middle school feeder pattern that will lead into schools that have the IB or Cambridge program. Last year, CMS had there were 4 schools, and now they have one more, so there are a total of 6 North Carolina high schools with this program. Over the course of a child's time in high school, we hope that they will be able to experience at least an honors course or a dual enrollment or AP or IB, for this report, AP, IB, and Cambridge course before they graduate. And so we pulled the numbers, and we're looking at 37.7% of last year's high school graduates were enrolled at some point during their time in high school in an AP, and IB, or Cambridge course. That's fantastic. So why, I think they're waiting, because now why? Why in the world did this happen? So we're gonna talk about some factors.
Yes, no, you know me, I just love confetti and sprinkles, because there are not many times we get to do that here, and this year in particular, it's remarkable. I've come to tears many times. So why? Why has this happened? There are kind of 5 main areas that we feel like really has helped these outcomes that don't happen just overnight, right? It takes many, many years. So the first one here, Ruben, if you don't mind going to the next slide, or Lou, is that at the department, we, and with Superintendent Truitt's support, as well as other superintendents, we have been able to synergize all of the efforts of advanced learning within one office, right? So working all the way from kindergarten all the way through high school, that same language, right? The same intention of equity and excellence, this idea that this is about truly unlocking potential in students and then responding K-12 is really exciting. And I feel like this synergy, which no other state has, is truly one of the reasons why things are moving in that direction, because even in districts now, they're starting to bring pieces together. And when you synergize efforts, magic happens, and sprinkles and all sorts of good things. So that's one reason. Another reason is that we have had a sustained focus and vision with advanced learning and gifted ed in our state for equity and excellence, right? It's about expanding excellence. You do both together, and we came to you years ago, even right before you all had adopted your resolution, and that I think is one of the precedents why y'all got equity and excellence, but this idea that we have to work intentionally for mindset shifts, policies, and practices, all 3 together. We can't just rely on just a teachers. We can't just rely on legislation. We can't just rely on mindset shift. They all have to come together for this change. And I feel very strongly, and we have some research papers being written about North Carolina to show this, because for the last 10 to 15 years, we really have been moving. And now we are seeing these outcomes that are just spectacular, that our districts as well have really focused on this, and we're just thrilled to see those outcomes. The other piece, just like Amy talked about, is
focus on this effort, but also through the AP partnership and College Board. Sometimes educational partners get criticized. I will say, during COVID, I have never been prouder of an external partner than I have than the College Board. They shifted in 2 months, not only providing lessons online when our teachers had so many other things to do and to deal with, they made sure students had computers to take their exams. They shifted to online exams. And with that, over the last 2 years, they have developed such an online portal of teacher resources. It has mitigated some of our smaller districts not having experienced teachers or a teacher to teach. So when you have a first or second year teacher that's really gung-ho and wants to try this, you have resources, you have lesson plans, you have information, you have assessments, all there at their fingertips. Students, and I'm going to talk about students in a minute, but the resources that they're providing. So what the partnership has done and College Board has done truly is magnificent, and I could not be more proud for our state to be partnering with them in this effort. And of course, you're going to hear about it, but the local efforts of becoming integrated and more intentional, all from Chapel Hill all the way to Alexander, all across our state. It's pretty remarkable what's happening there. Again, the local efforts, you're going to hear about it, but they are removing barriers. It used to be that you have to take X course to get Y course. You have to have, a special sticker way back when to get into these courses. And no, if you have the interest and the motivation, we're going to scaffold you and support your participation because we know that matters. The idea of focused guidance, of sitting down and saying, hey, maybe you could take this course. It's incredible. And of course, all the state efforts of the policies, sharing of the good work, the no test fees and clear messaging and the data sharing. All of that has played into this. And most important, our students. We've talked to some students, and students are beginning to advocate for themselves in ways that I have not seen before post-COVID, and I'm looking at our Teachers of the Year. But it's incredible what's happening, and some of them are even sharing messages of them sending out to their friends, hey, you could take this course. I think you've shared with me some of the great work that students are doing. Because they see that, hey, we have these resources. You don't have to afford to go buy a big book. You don't have to do all this. So there are lots of reasons, and I'm sure there are lots more reasons if you did some statistical analysis, but this is what we see from our work, and we're just so pleased with all of our districts for really working to realize equity and excellence and how we really have to intentionally address all three of those mindsets, policies, and practices. All right.
I'm honored to bring you confetti and sparkles in the form of a couple of districts who are going to share their stories and what they do to increase and get the great results that they have. We have chosen, many districts are doing this, so I want to make sure we know that it's not only 2 districts, but we wanted to highlight districts who are in 2 different regions, 2 different sizes, so that you can see what are the practices that are happening and being done to promote success for our students. I'd like to invite up Lincoln County Schools, Dr. Heath Belcher, the Associate Superintendent, and Heather Myers, Director of Academic Readiness and Support.
Well, good morning and greetings from Lincoln County. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to speak to you this morning about some of our AP successes. Lincoln County, we are a rural district. We have around 11,300 students, and we look like a lot of other districts across the state, not very different. We have a lot of the same challenges and the same problems, a lot of the same demographic makeup of a lot of our districts across the state. And so some of our success that I'll quickly outline is we offer a total of 23 advanced placement courses. And around 700 students last year have benefited from that and had taken nearly 1,150 courses. So a lot of our students are taking at least 1 advanced placement course, but also 2 or 3 advanced placement courses. And one thing that we really are proud of, that we have increased the total number of exams given over the previous year by around 5%. And you've heard some of this data already presented statewide. But when you look at the district data for us specifically, our proficiency increased 12.6%. So we also have experienced, just like the whole state, that increase in proficiency. One thing that I think is worth noting, between 6 to 12% increase across all of our 4 high schools. So we have 4 traditional high schools in our county, and all of those experienced proficiency increases and gains, and upward as high as 12%. Last year, our graduating class, our senior class, 23% of our seniors scored 3 or better on at least one AP exam while in high school. And so not only are we increasing opportunities for students and access for students to take these advanced placement courses, but they're also performing at higher levels. So nearly a quarter of our students that graduated have a college credit through the advanced placement program because they scored that level 3. Our Hispanic and our Latino exam takers has increased by nearly 20%, and 3 or better, and this number is staggering. Out of that 20%, nearly 40% proficiency, or a 3 or better from our Hispanic students. So 39.6% 3 or better on that. And then our African American students, we did decrease just a notch, about 3.7%, but those that scored 3 or better increased by 27.3% as well. So when we're talking about access and eliminating those opportunity gaps for our students, we have some real data that supports the work of the AP partnership. And so how have we been able to do that? A couple of things that I'll highlight from the student perspective. One thing, our students experience high quality instruction through our advanced placement program, and it is because of that partnership and the access to those resources that the partnership provides. High quality instruction, high quality lesson plans and resources that the teachers are able to provide those students. It certainly magnifies that learning experience in the classroom. Our students also have benefited greatly from the scaffolding that our teachers provide, our advanced placement courses. Every student that goes into an AP class are guaranteed to get some kind of before or after school support if needed. That's a commitment that our AP teachers have made. We've been committed to providing some stipend pay and tutor pay for those AP teachers that are providing some of those advanced placement support sessions before or after school so that they can experience success and don't have to worry about if they really are motivated and want to be in there. We're going to provide them the support that they need to experience success. One thing that you heard a lot about was the counseling, and that students are provided to help them understand the benefits and the differences between advanced placement courses and CCP courses and all of those options that our students have now. So our counselors have been very deliberate in having those individual conversations with students, but then also our advanced placement teachers come behind them and advocate for their courses that they're teaching. They begin to identify talent that comes through their course, through their classrooms, so that students can then continue to take those courses. So you have the counseling services, and then you have that mentor relationship with the advanced placement teacher that helps support that. And then we continue to look at in Lincoln County opportunities to expand our AP course offerings, and you've heard a little bit about some of those across the state, but some specific examples for us in Lincoln County, AP Seminar and AP Research that provide some of those flexibility options, and then looking at expanding out and even some of those arts that come with AP, like music, is one that we're really interested in examining in the future to continue to expand some of those advanced placement courses. Ms. Myers is going to continue to share some of those next steps and some of the strategies that we've been able to leverage in Lincoln County.
So we continue to look at AP growth in Lincoln County, being a smaller district but surrounded by larger districts. We want to make sure we get a lot of influx of students coming from those larger districts into us, making sure that we can continue to offer them competitive choices and opportunities and not limit them. And one of the things that we're particularly looking at is intentionally reviewing how we set up our prerequisites and our course sequences and removing those, particularly in light of changes to the North Carolina high school graduation requirements, particularly around social studies. You know, can we remove district regulations requiring them to take more courses than they needed to because we originally thought they needed those extra courses to be prepared and be successful in an AP class, when really not every child needed that. So we're beginning to, we've removed a lot of those, beginning to continue to remove some of those, but not removing that support in the master plan as far as the big picture sequence. So if a student feels like they need to and want to take an honors course to lead into an AP course, it's there. That pathway is there for them, particularly for some of our struggling students or may not have had that background. But the student who doesn't need that can go right to an AP course. So providing them more of an individualized plan for how they want to do the rigor instead of district set guidelines about what we think is necessary for all 11,000 students. The other thing that I think is very important is because we are a small district with 4 high schools, you can walk into a high school and we're going to have one AP stats teacher, we're going to have one pre-calc teacher. So really capitalizing upon the professional development opportunities provided by the North Carolina Partnership so that our AP teachers are not teaching in silos and they have that same PLC opportunity that other department people have in their buildings. Being able to talk to them not only around the state, at the symposiums, but what can we do to help them back at our district with some cross-district PLCs. Our 4 high schools are very, very different as far as demographics and success. However, they're teaching the same subjects and they're teaching our students. So giving them an opportunity to come together across the high school and not be so geographically siloed. And particularly, one thing that I think that allows us as a small district to offer so many AP courses, which of course positively impacts equity and access, is the fact that we do strategically centrally locate some of our classes. We do not have an online academy. We believe fully in face-to-face instruction and providing that mode of instruction. However, with offering our AP courses, it became necessary to look at where did we see low enrollment at the 4 high schools. We don't want to see that opportunity go away for some of those classes. Obviously, somebody wants those courses, but how can we use Canvas, how can we use asynchronous and synchronous learning and centrally located courses to compile those and combat staffing issues as well, and still continue to offer a robust program. And that is something that we are definitely looking at, particularly with the courses that Dr. Belcher mentioned, which is expanding in foreign language and music. Those are things that one high school can't sustain, but we as a district can find ways to support those students. Thank you. Thank you.
And now I'd like to invite up Durham Public Schools. We have Dr. Pascal Mubenga, Superintendent, and I believe Ms. Laura Parrott, Director of Advanced Academics, are going to come up. Also here with them is Dr. Debbie Pittman, Assistant Superintendent of Specialized Services. Dr. Mubenga?
Good morning. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the NC Board of Education, as well as Superintendent Truitt, for the invitation extended to Durham Public Schools to share about our progress regarding advanced placement. And special thank you to Shay, Hay, Cotran, and Beth Cross as well for the opportunity. DPS, or Durham Public Schools, shares your commitment to broaden student access and successful participation in advanced courses. We applaud the progress North Carolina Public Schools are making as reflected in the state level information that is highlighted this morning. Durham Public Schools has made tremendous progress in 3 areas. 1, increasing access. 2, increasing participation. 3, increasing performance in AP growth of all our students, and particularly with our Black and Hispanic or Latinx students. I'm pleased to introduce Laura Parrott, our Director of Advanced Academics, who has been laser focused on leading this work. Laura.
Good morning, Superintendent Truitt, Chairman Davis, and members of the State School Board. To truly shift mindsets in our district, we knew the conversation had to begin with reflection, not only on the enrollment data of our AP program, but truly looking at questioning our why. Why aren't our AP classes reflective of the demographics in our schools? Partnering with our Research and Accountability Department, as well as our Equity Affairs Department, we provided each high school's administrative team the subgroup enrollment data for their AP courses to analyze. In which classes did they notice a closer alignment with school demographics? In which classes did they see the greatest discrepancy? And which class might we have the most significant gains with a greater focus on inviting students to be a part of that course? To further our understanding of why AP courses were not as reflective as they should be, we turned to student focus groups to hear from them, to hear the voices of our students. We invited our students to share their stories with us. What we discovered was that many of our students did not have a clear understanding of what AP courses were, how to register, and the benefits of taking an AP course. And while our district had removed teacher recommendation as a prerequisite, many students believed that that practice was still in place. Dispelling the myths of AP courses had to begin with stronger communication with our students and with their families. Thus began our work to host family information nights in both English and Spanish, where a diverse group of current and past AP students shared their experiences, outlining the benefits of taking AP courses and definitely encouraging others to enroll. Laying the groundwork for removing teacher recommendations and broadening the access for all students required a comprehensive approach. Knowing the success national author Andrew Sherris wrote about in his book, All Fours and Fives, we reached out to him directly, and we began a year-long partnership that was truly transformative for our teachers, our counselors, and our administrators. Our office provided books. We have 10 high schools to our schools. We engaged in a series of 4 professional development sessions with Andrew Sherris, which was focused on creating an AP culture within our schools where all students felt welcomed, supported, and celebrated. Furthering our work on shifting mindsets, our North Carolina AP partnership provided our high schools additional professional development on strengthening equity in AP. As school teams collaborated together to change the AP culture in their buildings, our department worked with multiple district-level departments to create an equitable AP recruitment guide. We know recruitment should not only be through the AP teachers or counselors, but a school-wide approach. If we are broadening access, we must broaden our recruitment efforts. We utilized all trusted adults in the building. The Equitable Recruitment Guide provides schools various strategies to further relationships with student groups beyond just looking at our demographic groups. Outreach must be expanded to all students. We examined our sports teams, our clubs, CTE, visual and performing arts students, etc. When a child has an adult they trust, who has established a relationship with them, who then takes the time to reach out and encourage them to enroll in AP because they believe in them, great things happen. Confetti and stickers. This work is reflected in the 24% increase in exams taken, with increased representation from all subgroups, such as a 22.2% increase for our African American students and a 59.3% increase for our Hispanic students. And yes, their performance followed suit. To keep our district's vision of equitable access with successful participation in student performance, professional development must be ongoing. Continuing our work with the North Carolina AP Partnership and their support of our vision and efforts, intentional work with teachers, individual school-level support, and administrative collaboration remains at the forefront. We believe in our teachers and students, and we celebrate the continued success they have demonstrated. Special recognition to our superintendent, Dr. Pascal Mabinga, for serving as the superintendent representative for the Southern States on College Board's Superintendent Advisory Council. His service continues to strengthen the relationship we have with College Board and the advocacy to continue the work.
It's truly an honor for our educators and our students to be acknowledged by the State Board of Education. Your thoughtful recognition not only validates the hard work and dedication of our district, but also inspire us to do more for our students. Thank you.
So thank you to both school systems for being here. And as you'll note, some common themes: intentionality by leveraging resources, problem solving. Instead of asking, why would we do this? It's more of a why not. And communication. What we will do is continue our communication with the districts. We pull together district leaders every month. I meet with International Baccalaureate Cambridge and NCAP Partnership every week with BARD. But we also want to continue to look at our data and really look into, there's one student group, our Native American student group that I'm interested in, and looking at their access and success, and do some data dives. So while we celebrate, and we have a lot to celebrate, we're not where we want to be. And we also need to remember that, and that we will not be complacent. And thanks to all the hard work, and thank you for your guidance and support.
Magnificent, thank you. And thank you so much to our districts. As always, when we've heard a report like this, you really bring home the reality of the words that we heard, the laser focus, the intentionality. Just thank you so much for that work, and I'm sure that there are other districts across the state that are doing it, or our numbers would not be at where they are. So, thank you. Did you have more that you wanted to say? No, ma'am. All right. If there's a quick question, but the clock is ticking, so quick. Mr.
No
Butler.
question. I'd like to make a comment. Former trustee at one of the UNC schools. Couple of comments. Number one, thank you for helping with diversity. That is one of the goals of all the UNC schools, is with diversity. And you're hearing what you're doing with Latinx and Black students is just amazing. So that's number one. Number two, the UNC schools are really being pushed for graduation rate. So everything you're doing, which is being validated today, is also helping them with their work, and it helps the taxpayers of North Carolina and the students, because as our students graduate sooner, there are more availability for other students to do this. So thank you for your amazing report.
Great connection there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, yes.
The sad part for me is, while I celebrate everything, and I see it happening every day in school systems, our report card that we have for schools is, these indicators don't show up. And this is a true measure of quality of what's going on in our schools. And I just beg for the day to come where the report card in North Carolina allows school districts and schools to get credit for this type of work and not be based on a single test score. We need to get to that point.
It's in our proposal already. Point taken.
Yeah,
Madam Chair.
thank you so much for making that point. Yes.
I know time is of essence, but I just need to say this. The data, the report that we've heard today, to me, this validates the point that if a child is given the opportunity to participate at another level, he or she, regardless of where they come from, can do it with the appropriate support. It validates that your background, who your dad have to be, your mom have to be, your household, but you can achieve at higher levels. And those percentages of children just says to me, there is still hope. And our kids can do if we just help them to do. And I'm sorry, I know I took up
No,
time,
no
but I had to
apologies.
say it.
No, that was a great way to almost end, but we're gonna let Ms. Jones end us.
Thanks, Ms. Cabinet. And I know the report was long, but this is the one report I've understood. So, we got a lot of data, but this data I get. And there is one point I really want to amplify the strategies that we talked about students being directly invited, but there's one that I will speak to. And that also is the equity and diversity of our educators. And not just looking at who is already teaching our AP courses, but looking at, to Don's point, the data of who is growing students in English 1.
Yes.
Who is growing students in Math 1? Those teachers then being developed as AP teachers.
That's a great
because
idea.
kids will follow instructors that they know are invested in them. So allowing data to drive our course curriculum as opposed to, I've always taught calculus, and now these kids have to norm themselves to me. Who are the teachers who are reaching all kids and developing those teachers and allowing them to share those talents on a broader scale?
Thank you so much. Ms. Shaw Coltrane, you can stay right there.
Yes,
'cause I
ma'am.
need you for a minute on the next one. Thank you, Ms.
Yes.
Goss. We are now moving to our action items, and we will just go through fairly rapidly. SLA 2 is our new policy on Parents' Guide to Student Achievement. We're not going to dig into this because we did talk about it last month at length, but Ms. Shaw Coltrane has one thing she wants to
Yes, so
let us
we've
know
been
about.
getting lots of questions from your districts, and I just want to make sure you're aware of kind of what we're doing. Next Monday, we will be doing a statewide webinar to release our 2 resources. One will be a template that folks can force their own copy if that's helpful for them to use for this parent's guide, but also we have prepared kind of considerations for them in language that they could, in X district, we provide these options and here are websites. Like, we've really tried to gather information. So just to let you know, in case you're asked, next Monday, we'll be sharing all that information after the board approves this tomorrow.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. SLA 3 is a recommendation to approve the proposed K-12 guidance standards. As you will remember, the decision has been made to adopt the American School Counselors Association student standards, and so we will be voting on that tomorrow. There have been no changes there. SLA 4 is computer science courses satisfying graduation requirements. Mr. Michael went through this with us last month, but there have been 2 small revisions to those, to that document. Columns have been added for the aligned credential and tier by course. I believe that was something Superintendent Truitt suggested would be done to make it more clear. And then 2 Cambridge International Education courses have been added to the list. So we will be voting on those tomorrow. And then finally, SLA 5 is the ESSA Committee of Practitioners membership. We did see the members that were being recommended last month, and so that hasn't changed, but there has been some clarification in the list as to the qualifications of each member of that group, if you care to look at that. Finally, we have one consent item, which is SLA 6. It's a report to the General Assembly on the education of children in private psychiatric residential treatment facilities. This is an annual report. I think the title is quite self-explanatory. The positive news that is contained in this report is that there are 50 fewer children being served this year in those settings, although the average age has decreased slightly from 14 to 13 and length of stay has increased. And following that, that is the conclusion of the SLA discussion for today.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. One additional local superintendent I'd like to welcome is Dr. Jennifer Hefner from Alexander County Schools. Dr. Hefner, we're delighted to have you with us. We'll now move to our Healthy Responsible Students Committee, chaired by Mr. Reginald Keenan. Mr. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, I'm Reginald Keenan along with Mr. Wendell Hall. We'll bring going to be 2 items for action on first reading and be 1 for discussion. But the first item, Mr. Chair, we have on action for first reading, be discussing the policy amendments to the athletics policies. I think Mr. Ryan Collins will be up for that.
So I had to wait for the caravan to leave. Well, good morning, everybody. I am before you today to once again talk about interscholastic athletics, which in the spirit of the holidays truly is the gift that keeps on giving. So as you all recall, back in September during your meeting, the state board approved several proposed amendments to the rules on interscholastic athletics. Following that action, but prior to the initiation of the rulemaking process, the General Assembly enacted SL 2023-133, which makes significant changes to the state laws governing interscholastic athletics and requires the state board to adopt new temporary rules in time for the 24-25 school year. The High School Athletic Association, who's our partner in this process, has already amended its regulations to conform with the proposed rules that the state board previously approved on September 7th. To assist them with that, it is recommended, and until such time as the state board formally adopts the new rules, it's recommended that the state board go ahead and revise its policies on interscholastic athletics to reflect what was approved back in September. So I'm not planning to go through the documents in detail because they are documents that you've already seen in a different format before, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Any questions, comments this time? If not, thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Next, Mr. Chair, we have our attorney, Allison Schaefer, to discuss the Independent Appeals Board nomination.
We have before you one more person to come to be asked, or ask you to appoint to the Athletic Appeals Board, Rex Wells. Mr. Wells is a retired athletic director and worked in many of the schools in the western part of the state. He is from Region 8, and that is the region that we do not yet have a representative of. He is incredibly qualified. His resume is on your website, but he has 40 years experience as an educator, coach, and athletic administrator, and I've spoken with him, and he is honored to be asked to serve. He was nominated by the regional center out in the western part of the state.
Any questions, comments? If not, thank you, Allison. We'll go to HRS 3. That's a report to the General Assembly, the pilot program to raise the high school dropout age. And Ms. Karen Curley, for that, please. Report.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am coming to you as for every other year for the pilot program to raise the high school dropout age. It is a statutory requirement from 2016. And, all right, do I need to do this? Okay. It meets the State Board of Education Goal 1. And I'm sorry I didn't address Superintendent and the Chair. But I'm trying to help y'all catch up on time. So we've covered the objective. The pilot program, as you know, began with Hickory Public Schools and Newton Conover City Schools. First full year of implementation was 2015-16. Rutherford County Schools and McDowell were added in 2017. I'm just going to briefly note the disclaimer, and it's in your report as it relates to the data collection during the COVID. So I'm going to move on for the sake of time to the next slide. And it is the updates. And so the state dropout rate increased from 1.94 in 2021 to 2.25 in 21-22. Newton Conover 1.06 and Rutherford 2.79 experienced declines in dropout rates from 2021 to 21-22. Hickory 2.55 and McDowell 3.73 posted increases in dropout rates from 2021 to 22. Next slide. Update since the last slide, the state graduation rate declined from 87 in 2021 to 86.4 in 21-22. Hickory, McDowell, and Newton Conover and Rutherford posted declines in graduation rates from 21 to 22. Short-term suspension rate per 100, all students increased for Hickory, McDowell, Newton Conover, and Rutherford from 2021 to 21-22. Next slide. You need some help with this visual. Crime and Violence Acts at the high school level. Data listed includes the 4 pilot sites, and per legislation, Catawba County includes cities of Hickory, Newton, and Newton Conover. Catawba County, McDowell, and Newton Conover posted decreases in number of reportable crimes from pre-pandemic levels, 18-19 versus 21-22. Hickory numbers of reportable crimes remain the same. Rutherford posted an increase in number of reportable crimes from 18-19 to 21-22. The graduation rate, 21-22 state graduation rate decreased slightly from 2021, but is consistent with the pre-pandemic numbers. All pilot sites in Catawba County posted decreases from 2021 to 21-22. Catawba County, Hickory, Newton Conover, and McDowell posted declines from pre-pandemic rates of 18-19. Largest decrease was Newton Conover, 94.4 in 18-19 to 87.2 in 21-22. Rutherford's rate increased from pre-pandemic numbers, 84.2 in 18-19 to 87.2 in 21-22. Next slide. The state, Hickory, and McDowell dropout rates increased from 21 to 22. Catawba County, Newton Conover, and Rutherford's dropout rates decreased from 21 to 22. Compared to pre-pandemic rate, state dropout rates increased. Catawba County and Newton Conover posted a decline in the dropout rate from 18-19 to 21-22. Hickory, McDowell, and Rutherford posted increases in the dropout rate from 18-19, 21-22. Is that the next one? Okay. Discovery High is in Newton Conover. All high schools listed posted increases from 2021 to 21-22, except Discovery High, which posted a large decrease. The 4 high school rates are consistent with pre-pandemic numbers, although Hickory High and Discovery High posted decreases from 18-19 to 21-22. Next slide. Average daily attendance rate over time. All high schools listed posted decreases from 2021 to 21-22, except Hickory Career and Arts Magnet, which posted a slight increase. The 4 high school rates are consistent with pre-pandemic numbers, although Hickory High posted the largest decrease from 18-19 to 21-22. Short-term suspension. A short-term suspension short-term suspension rate per 100. All students at all sites posted large increases from 2021 to 21-22. From pre-pandemic levels, 18-19, all sites posted increases except McDowell, which decreased slightly. Largest increase was Hickory, 15.76 to 26.23. Next slide, long-term suspension. A long-term suspension count, all students increased from 2021 to 21-22, but are consistent with pre-pandemic levels. The exception is Iredell Statesville, which is a neighboring county to Catawba, which more than doubled from 18-19 to 21-22. Next slide on recommendation. The increased communications with the judicial system, including district attorneys and judges, might help that critical support system understand this session law as well as the impact to its local community. Increased communication with social service agency would be another positive opportunity. Allow more time for communication efforts. And in light of the Raise the Age legislation and major changes to the juvenile justice system taking place as a result, revisit moving the age for the state, even if there's an opting out opportunity. Further explore ramifications of attendance issues as main reasons listed by school for student dropout. And the House Bill 206 was not successful in this term. Any questions?
of all, given the area where this study is focused, I think Dr. Phipps is to be congratulated for having avoided Caldwell County from being included.
I'm just asking why I wasn't in there.
Sometimes it's good to be out of it.
So the question I had is, with the parental bill of rights issues that have come up recently and the 3-year graduation program, there's been an emphasis on parental signature and involvement for the 3-year graduation rate. The parents have to sign off on it. My understanding is for dropout, there is no such legislation that would require parents to actually have to authorize allowing their child to drop out of school, which seems a little odd to me. And I was wondering if that's part of the consideration of this legislation to look at that issue, to your knowledge.
To my knowledge, it is not. Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Please?
Just real quick for my understanding, and my understanding might be worse after I ask the question.
Okay.
We're looking at 21-22 data because dropout is a lagging indicator that you don't really determine until the next school year. So you couldn't look at, for example, 22-23 because you're still figuring some of that stuff out, the discipline and the other data for dropout. So you're always a year back.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that is correct.
Anyone else? If not, that concludes the report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fairley. Thank you, Mr. Keenan. We're now moved to the Educator Standards and Practice Committee led by Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine. I chair this committee, and joining me in that responsibility is Dr. Donna Tipton-Rogers. This month, the report for my committee is rather brief. We have one action on first reading, and this is pertaining to the legislation that has established the teacher compensation, the advanced teaching roles. And also, we're going to hear a lot about recommendations for the new awardees, not by name, but by criterion and how they rank and so on and so forth. And presenting that item is Dr. Tomberlin, and he's coming forward.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Oxendine.
Good morning. Good morning.
So I am here to present the funding awards for the 24-25 school year advanced teaching roles proposals. So this budget bill did contain some changes to the advanced teaching roles program, and I do want to cover those with you really quickly. First was a requirement to issue a new RFP taking into account the additional new funding, which was $2 million in this biennial budget. The requirement to authorize New Hanover County Schools as an ATR program if New Hanover submitted a qualifying proposal by July 1st, 2023, and they did so. And then finally, defines adult leadership and classroom excellence roles and provides state-funded salary supplements for these positions, $10,000 and $3,000 respectively. So those are some great changes to the program, and our districts are very excited about the state support for the supplements for these roles. They also defined the 2 roles. As many of you know, these programs are the inspiration of the individual districts, and so they may call roles different things from district to district, but the state defines the advanced teaching roles, which would be eligible for a $10,000 supplement as those teachers who work in classrooms providing instruction for at least 30% of the instructional day. They lead a team of teachers between 3 and 8, and notice the cap of 8 on the teachers. They cannot be spread out in great numbers. They can't have a lot of teachers underneath them. Shares responsibility for the performance of the students of all teachers on the team. I can inform you that I've been working closely with our EBOS group to develop one way to measure the impact of those teachers. That's not to suggest that that's the only way we would do it, but that is the initial start. And then finally is not a school administrator. And then the classroom excellence role is identified as an advanced teacher and assumes and maintains responsibility for at least 20% additional students versus the number they had before they assumed that role. And then is a member of a team of teachers led by the adult leadership teacher. So we have these nice statewide definitions to help our districts identify, regardless of what they're calling them in their own districts, whether they qualify for these supplements. Next, we go to the proposal reviews, and this year we had 5 reviewers. Those reviewers come from Department of Public Instruction staff members who are not in the office that I supervise. So these would be from other offices in the agency, ed prep program faculty, and education nonprofit organizations. The evaluation rubric covers 7 domains. And here they are listed. I won't go through them all with you, but those are the focus areas of the rubric and the scoring. I do want to talk briefly about New Hanover County Schools. They did submit a proposal to NCDPI prior to July 1st, 2023. That proposal was reviewed by NCDPI staff for compliance with program requirements given the status that was conferred by the General Assembly. We did not review the proposal for quality, only for compliance. And there was some compliance issues that I worked with the district to address, and they submitted a compliant proposal by the deadline. NCDPI recommends SBE authorize the New Hanover as an ATR program for the 23-24 school year. And this is a little different. This is an authorization for this academic year. The other proposals that you will be reviewing are for implementation in the 24-25 school year. We had 8 RFP respondents this year, and here they are listed in alphabetical order. I do want to point out, as I review the program numbers, those do not align with the alphabetical list here. We try to preserve the anonymity of the districts until the board has made their decision. And then next we have summary scores for this RFP. As you can see, we gave you the point total for each of the domains, and then the percentage score that represented for each of the proposals. And then on the other side there, their average rating on those individual categories. Historically, DPI has chosen to recommend to you for approval any program that met or exceeded an 80% score on the rubric. To give you a little context for this, when we first started doing this, we found that districts, we didn't know where to set the cut score. We did find that districts expressed a difficulty with any funding that was less than 80% of what they had asked for, because we'd always had, initially we had insufficient funding for the number of programs that were applying. So that 80% was set as that's the minimum we will go for funding recommendations, and we applied that same 80% to the rubric. And this, of course, is totally at the discretion of the board as to how many programs you might wish to approve, but this is the numbers and this is the recommendations that we've brought to you. And so you can see from the chart that there would be 2 of these 8 that met that 80% threshold. And these programs, and so on the next slide, we show you that if you selected these 2 programs, approved these 2 programs, in addition to New Hanover, these would be the totals that we're looking at for the funding of those programs. The far right column shows you the per year. So we fund these over 3 years, and that would be the 3-year funding, grant funding for each of those programs, with a total of about $1 million. So the issue here is that we have a little over $2 million to distribute this year. So this chart represents the funding totals for all our encumbrances for the 23-24 and 24-25 school year. And if you can see at the bottom there, we have an excess, given all of our encumbrances, including the 2 recommendations that I just made, we have a total available of about 1.65 million, I think is, I'm having a hard time seeing that number from the screen.
I'm sorry, what are you asking?
At the very bottom of the first column, it's I think it should be like 1.65 million total available.
Total available, it says 5.54.
Oh, okay, so total, the total there then should read 1.65, correct? That's what's left over with these two funding. That's what's we need to spend in this fiscal year. That is what the total amount we need to spend in this fiscal year is 1.6 million. So in an effort to do that, I've created a proposed funding model for you for the 23-24 school year. So we would provide planning funds to two of our districts in the amount of the two recommended districts in the amount of $150,000. That's $300,000 of that total. The contract for our evaluation is $200,000. And for the remaining funds, we would recommend that you increase funding for all active programs, and that's 20 programs at $57,659 and some change for each of those 20 programs. And that would leave us about $5 on the table, I think, under that provision. So that is our funding recommendation for this cycle.
Tom, are you entertaining a question at this
I
point
am.
or later?
Yes, ma'am, that's fine.
Are you any questions about how to go about it? I'm understanding this correct. You're recommending that we, in addition to the way you've already parlayed out, give the all 20 a little bit more money, 57,000, is that correct?
Yes, the 20 active programs that we have in the state.
Would we have to do something different? I mean, how would we need to go back and rethink a rubric perhaps, or how would we make that determination?
Well, given the time, so you could develop a system where districts applied for additional funding. So you could do it as a competitive basis. But the problem is that this comes about in December, January, and that's a short amount of time for districts to get together, to shift gears, and then we'd have to have the process on our end. It would take months before we could get the money out that way.
Well, you don't want to do that.
Well,
But thank you for being candid.
I mean, in theory, it's a great idea that we're potentially giving them money that they're not expecting and may have difficulty using. It would be much better to give them money if they had a plan for that money, but the timing makes that difficult.
Are there other thoughts from my colleagues around the table? Vice Chair Duncan?
Could I ask, I think, the logical question? Proposal 4 is at 79.17%, so if one of the reviewers had been 1% higher on average, it would have made the 80% cut. It's a pretty good divide between that and the next contested, if you will, at 75%. So the question really is, have we adhered strictly to 80% with zero variance, or is something as close as that worthy of consideration?
So in terms of just continuity, I want to clarify that I adhere to 80%. You are under no requirement to adhere to 80%.
I did hear you say that, but I'm asking whether you have, you meaning the reviewers, have always just recommended 80%.
So that's always been a function of availability of funds and program quality. I can say that there's no statistical reason, I can't ascertain a statistical difference between a 75 and an 80. This is not based on some kind of calculation or calculus that I've performed. This is, as I said earlier, we know that 80% districts have indicated they could not implement their program successfully if they were funded at rates lower than 80% of what they asked for in their budget. That issue came up early on because we rarely had enough funding for all the proposals. And we surveyed the districts in that way. We've just used that 80 in this situation as well.
In this particular year, we could fund a third program for $150,000 and still give the remaining 20 schools
Mr. Rafar and I discussed this, and we spec'd out what would happen if the board were to ask this question. So we kind of
I did say it was
anticipated.
an obvious question.
Yeah, it is.
I was gonna ask it if you did.
So we did contemplate that we might get some questions like this. And the funding would support we have enough funding to support up to 3 more or possibly 4 additional programs in this cycle. And that would allow us, is this the updated one? So if you look, if we included, and we just took a guess at the next 3, and I think that would assume a cut score of 75. And if we assumed a cut score of 75, then you would include 3 additional programs. You'd still be left with $700,000 in this fiscal year because, again, they would only get $150,000 in planning. But the second column is the column of interest. That's what it would do once you started kicking in their actual funding requests. And there, if we added those 3, in 24-25, we would still have $479,000 left over for the 24-25 school year. Now, I don't want you to interpret that number as what we need for the next round of RFPs, because that won't occur till 25-26. So if you look at that number, even with those encumbrances, we'd still have $2.4 million for the 25-26 school year to fund new programs. The 478 we would use for planning funds for whatever proposals you selected in the 24-25 school year. So there is ample funding to support the selection of more districts, and it will not, it won't jeopardize our ability to fund programs in the future.
Ms. Kamnitz?
Does that preclude giving money to the existing programs, or you're saying you could still do that?
So that $700,000 in the first column would still need to be distributed to other approved programs.
Okay, so this is just, okay, so this second chart does not include that increase that we saw initially. It would be much less, the 20 existing programs would get less money.
Would get a less additional money. They'll get the money that you see on the chart up there. That money has already been dedicated to them.
Perhaps in the vicinity of
I like that plan.
10,000 or so, depending on what happens with the contract cost for the assessment evaluation.
It wouldn't depend on the contract cost for these proposals because we're only giving them planning funds for this year. So it would, there are ways, you could look at it a couple of ways. You could give it to the active programs, the ones that are not in continuation. So those continuation funds up above are just to keep those programs, to provide them with state funding, which is necessary for them to appreciate the K-2 class size flexibility, which is critical to the program. But you could award it to those that are in active status, which are the ones starting with Lincoln County, and those below Lincoln County. So that would be Lincoln, Mount Airy, Nash, Thomasville, and Wake County, and New Hanover. You could provide them with some additional funding.
Vice Chair Duncan?
No, go ahead.
No, you, go ahead.
Well,
We're still in discussion mode a little bit here.
What I was gonna ask was, you obviously anticipated there could be some questions, and you went deeper than I went. But with my question, which was to go 3 additional schools, and it looks like there'd be about 35,000 then left to distribute to the other 20 schools at that point. Do you have a recommendation? Let me finish the
I'm
question.
sorry.
Between 3 choices. 1, keep it strictly at 80% based on that judging process that was undergone. Go to the break off at 79%, which seems somewhat more obvious, or because of the funds we have available, go to 75%. Is there any recommendations that you would be making to the board as we look at this process?
So I want to be clear what the board's responsibility is under the statute today. and that is you need to select the programs by December 15th. So there, we could parse this, and you decide which programs you want to recommend, and that's all you would vote on today, and we can bring back to you a funding model for approval in next month, where we work out all the permutations, as it were, of given this. There is another little small piece to this, is that Harnett County has informed me that they want to suspend their program for this year. So their funding comes back into the mix and needs to be expended for this fiscal year.
Ms. Kamnitz? I mean, I would support having as many districts be able to utilize these teaching positions as possible. So I guess my bottom line question to you would be, would this protect the viability of the existing programs and the new programs? Is there sufficient funds for them to run a viable program?
Yes. So when we talk about viability, we need to parse this a little bit. The ones on the top, above Lincoln County, are what we would consider mature programs. They're in their second round of funding. So we give them, and these programs are designed to be sustainable. So we're giving them a nominal amount of money, $100,000, I don't know if it's a nominal amount, but we're giving them some state funds so they can continue to exercise that flexibility. Because that's a requirement in the law. You only get the K-2 flexibility if you're receiving grant funds from the state for this program. I think, so to your question, all those above the line, above Lincoln County, will continue to be viable, and we can continue to support them through the end of their second term, 3-year term. The ones below Lincoln County and below, those are what we consider newer programs in their first term. They need that additional money to make the changes and to properly implement their program so it can continue. My recommendation would be to, if we have extra money, to load more money into those programs so that we're assuring that when they get to the continuation phase, it is just about continuation and not about continued implementation. I have not heard from any of these programs that they feel that their funding is insufficient, but I think the case with most, we can always do more with more. And so, kind of, to answer your question, nobody's in jeopardy of not being able to implement their program based on any of the decisions that you will make.
And the programs we're talking about, the new programs that we're talking about, they would all be funded within the 80%, within 80% of their requested funding.
They're all these programs are fully funded.
They're fully funded, even with 6 or 5.
Even if we included the 3, they would all be fully funded.
Right, and just, this is my ignorance here, but the additional, the $10,000 and $3,000 additions to salaries that the General Assembly just approved, this is separate from.
That is separate. Those stipends are separate. That's a $10.9 million pot of money. We're working on that
just
in conjunction with this. Okay. So those are, but yes, but this is not the question you asked, but I think you raise a question that the board needs to be aware of. In 25-26, you see in the third column, those districts above Lincoln County no longer are eligible for continuation funds. And unless the law changes to allow them the K-2 class size flexibility as being part of the program, not as receiving funds, then their programs are in some jeopardy. I mean, we could reasonably give them $1 every year, but what we would like to see is that once they've gone through those 2 cycles, they have program status, and as long as they continue, they can exercise those flexibilities.
That's so, yeah, really important. Separate from this question, but also of concern.
Are there other questions? we have a decision to make, I suppose, your what I'm hearing is that this action on first read that we'll take, vote on tomorrow. Am I hearing that there is some consensus around looking at 75 points versus the 80 points, and then adding 2 additional districts to the, or four additional districts?
Three.
Three, I'm sorry. 3 additional, taking the remaining money and spreading it across all of the existing, all of the 20. Is that correct?
We can certainly do that. And to clarify, I would be bringing the funding, the final vote of the funding back to you next month, because that's not, it's going to take some time to deal with all these differences. And we can certainly, but we do need to select the 3 districts. We need to select whatever districts the board deems appropriate at this meeting under the action of first read, and I can bring the funding back to you next month.
Okay, very good. Any questions?
How do we, does someone need to make them, how do we move, if we do want to move forward with a larger number of districts, how do we do that?
The committee would need to bring a recommendation to the board at tomorrow's meeting.
I'll work with Rupen and the chair on that.
And it would also be helpful for me to know if moving the cut score to 75 is something the board wants as the established cut score moving forward. Again, this was done very early on in the process. You've got much more information now than you had in the past. If the desire is to, I need to understand if you're moving it under these conditions, or do we want to move it as a program requirement moving forward?
Well, that's a very good, that's a question that was rolling around in my mind too as we were having this discussion. I wonder if we're thinking about this futuristically changing to 75, seems like that would need to be a separate item to come to the board.
Sure, we can do that next month as well too.
It seems to be so connected but not connected. As Chair Dave, I'll defer to you.
Well, on that point, to me, the question is there any correlation between that number and a district's ability to run a viable program?
Well, I couldn't answer that empirically because we've never approved a program with less than 80% on the rubric. So I wouldn't be able to tell you that programs below 80% did just as well as those above 80% because they've never been funded. My guess is no.
So why again, for another day, but why 80%? How'd you come up with that number? So let's table that and put that on the next agenda when this item comes back to us. But we need, at least I need that kind of clarity. It seems frankly arbitrary. So.
To your point, Chair Davis, this goes back to my original kind of a question, I suppose, around revising the rubric. Wouldn't we need, in order to go to, whether we go up or down, seems like the rubric, the criterion would need to be tweaked. And that would justify perhaps, we could make something stronger or whatever, adjust the pieces of the rubric to get it in line with that number, those points.
I'm not certain that would need to be the case, but I will point out, the rubric is rated on a 1 to 5 scale. So if we think about 80%, that means we're asking a program to have an average of 4 across all the ratings. So that's a high mark. If you move it to 75, you're putting it 3.5 between the 3 and the 4 line. And so I think rather than the rubric being redesigned, maybe the rating scale needs to be redesigned so that we know exactly what the average rating is across and what we expect of a program, and then we can calculate what score that would be or what percentage that would be.
Okay, very good. I'm not going to prolong this. I do think, though, that it needs to be a separate item that we deal with the points, the number of points, and maybe next month.
Sure.
Okay, discussion, we'll move along. And so the next item is go back to my notes. We're now to an action item, ES&P, and this is pertaining to some amendments in our general licensing requirement, 001, and you have that, Dr. Thompson.
Yes, ma'am. So these are policy amendments that we're recommending for LICN 001, and these are reflective of changes that were in the most recent appropriations bill. And those address two main issues, first being out-of-state educators, and second being limited license. So some technical changes in this. We made changes, there's lots of LEA acronyms in this policy, and we've changed all those to PSU, and we've defined what a PSU is and who's governed by that definition. Session Law 2023-134 revised one of the general statutes related to out-of-state licensure applicants. Previously, if you were coming to us from out of state and had 3 or more years of experience, you could only be issued a continuing professional license if you brought evaluation data with you and effectiveness data. And if you didn't, you were only allowed to hold an IPL. So this legislation changes that requirement. Teachers that have 3 or more years of service in another state and are in good standing can be issued a CPL without the effectiveness data. And so here in the policy, here's the policy language we've included. Applicant must provide documentation that he or she completed an educator prep program approved by the state in which the program resides. So this is our, when we talk about reciprocity, it's very important for you as board members to understand what we mean by reciprocity, and that relates to preparation. State statute requires that any educator licensed in North Carolina has to have gone through a preparation program. And so when we talk about reciprocity, we say, tell us where you did your preparation, and was that state recognized by the state in which that institution resides as an approved program. If they approve that program, we accept that preparation. And then on testing, there's always the question of what is comparable testing. And so we clarify it here in the policy. Comparable testing requirement is defined as a passing score on an examination that is approved by the state from which the educator license was issued and fulfills, in part, the requirement to convert the license to a continuing license in that state. So whatever got you the equivalent of a CPL in Virginia, that test we will accept in North Carolina as evidence of having meeting the content and or pedagogical requirements to hold the license. There is always an exception to this, and that is elementary education and exceptional children general curriculum. Those folks must meet the standard of a passing subtest in math and reading in order to be issued a license in North Carolina. Of course, as you know, we have provisions for those who are more experienced. They don't have to take a test. They can participate in some of the professional learning we have here in the state. But they have to meet that requirement of subtest of math and reading. In this section, we just consolidated the elementary and ECGC categories, and then we did some cleanup in the provisional licensing. These are technical, not substantive changes. And then Session Law 2023-134 also made changes to the limited license. The limited license is now a renewable license. It requires the same affidavits as we've seen in the past from both the principal and the superintendent attesting to the effectiveness of the teacher. But also now for the renewable license. So for the initial limited license, the teacher just has to demonstrate, we just need the affidavits demonstrating their effectiveness signed by the principal and the superintendent. And no effectiveness data is required for the initial application. However, if you want to renew a limited license, if the teacher teaches a subject that has EVOS, they must show that they meet expectations of growth in EVOS. in order to renew that limited license. To answer the question that I'm sure everybody's wondering, what if the teacher doesn't teach in a subject that has EVAS? Then that requirement is not applicable, and we just go with the affidavits from the superintendent and the principal. So here's the policy language updated in LICN 001. If you'll notice at the bottom, this is going to be a big question in the districts. How do you calculate EVAS? And so for the purposes of determining growth of a limited license renewal, all available growth data during the teacher's prior limited license period will be used. So whatever your initial limited license period is, that's the period we'll look at for your EVAS. And we will use any available EVAS that's in that time period. If there's more than one, we will average all the available together to determine whether the teacher meets, does not meet, or exceeds expectation. And of course, a teacher's EVAS data from the 1920 and 2021 school year shall not be considered in the determination of eligibility. 1920 because it doesn't exist, and 2021 because there was substantial missing in the data, and we determined not to use those data for any high stakes decisions, which this would be a high stakes decision. That's it for LICN 001.
Very good. And then the last item still belongs to Dr. Tom Owen, and it pertains to licensure as well, revisions therein.
So these are changes to the licensure renewal requirements in LICN 005. And again, this was addressed in the appropriations bill. And this relates to the designation of CEUs in digital teaching and learning as a requirement for renewing the license. So as a result of that legislation, CEU can't be required solely for digital teaching and learning. The language of the law does say that districts can dedicate up to 2 CEUs related to the pedagogy of digital teaching and learning. I'm not the digital teaching and learning team, so I don't know exactly what that means, but we've addressed this in taking that requirement out of the policy and allowing it to be distributed within either the general requirements or the content requirements. So if you scroll down here, teachers, first we address teachers in grades pre-kindergarten through 5, and pre-kindergarten here is an addition because we now have, I think the last time we updated this, most of our districts did not have school-based pre-Ks, and now they do, and those are licensed teachers, and so they are covered by this renewal policy. So what we've done is we've taken those 2 formerly DLC requirements and made them general credits for teachers in pre-K to 5. You'll note they have 3 renewal credits that are assigned to their academic subject area and 3 addressing literacy specifically. And so we just made these 2 general ed credits. Of course, the PSU has the discretion to require assign additional literacy credits to their teachers if they feel that's appropriate. Next is 6 through 12, so our secondary folks, now they already had 3 general credits that they could use. So what we did was we took the 2 renewal credits in DLC and just distributed them between the academic subject and the general credits. So it's 4 and 4 for those folks now. There was a note in the legislation that stated that any time that an educator is asked to do a mandatory training, if it's mandated by the state or by the local Board of Education as a condition of employment, then that must be counted towards their CEUs. And so you can't, if the teacher's engaged in that, they can always count that towards their renewal credits, and it can't be considered non-relevant to their licensure renewal. The next issue is related to our National Board Certified Teachers. They have to complete renewal process every 5 years, I think it is, or even if they're engaged in the initial process, they can earn up to 8 credits for the initial process. And this policy clarifies a longstanding issue in the field of when those credits are allowable for use for renewing the license. I could find no statutory foundation or policy foundation that allowed you to what is termed bank these credits in the field. So in other words, you earn them in this renewal cycle, but you wait until a future renewal cycle to expend those credits. This is not allowable the way we understand it under the law or under the policy, so we're clarifying to the field that the renewal credits related to National Board Certification must be used in the renewal cycle in which they were earned. And this is just updating the chart with the requirements for each subject area. And I think that gets me there.
Are there questions?
I had a quick question,
Yes.
Tom, about the national boards for the renewal, because we're existing on 2 different renewal cycles. Like, some of us have been grandfathered into the 10-year renewal,
Okay.
and some of us are on the 5-year. Has there been any discussion about the difference between 2 renewal credits for a 10-year renewal and 2 renewal credits for a 5-year renewal? Because those processes are very different.
No, but that is something we could certainly look at and see if we've got a recommendation for the board.
Very good. I do have a comment, maybe, and a question. Going back to being given credit for attending mandatory training, that's news to me. I thought that was always the case.
Not necessarily. So, so let's use something like CPR. If you're requiring your staff to do CPR training, and it's I don't think you would do 80 hours of CPR training, but let's say you did, or 10 hours, I'm sorry, 10 hours of CPR training, then you couldn't assign that to your task. An LEA couldn't assign that task to their employee and then say, we don't think that should count towards your continuing education, because the districts make the recommendation of what counts for renewal, not us. So they tell us. And so this is just clarifying that if you require it, you have to give your employees the opportunity to use it towards their renewal. And I don't know what the impetus of that law was, but people seem to be shaking their heads that it's a thing.
It's a good thing.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
no, it's
absolutely.
codified. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Unless there are questions, that concludes the S&P.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. That concludes our morning's agenda. We will now break and return at 1:15. 1:15.